My name is Brian Buckley, and this is my 1991 Volkswagen Jetta GL. In 2009, I bought myself a Mark I with a very poorly done 16-valve swap. And at the time, I was working for coffee shops, and I was also a student at Universal Technical Institute. And I could not afford to make that car less of a train wreck. So oh my God, what did I do? I said to a guy in the class, I was just like, this thing's falling apart on me. I can't afford to keep up on it. Trade me for something. And he knew a guy who had this sitting underneath a car cover in Norwood. And he was some kid from Connecticut. And we just exchanged titles, and I took off with this. And I've had it since January of 2010. Yeah, it was in very rough shape. So at that time, it still had the original engine, it's still the original transmission, interior, it's always been red. It was originally a big bumper car, and a previous owner, somewhere along the way, probably if I were to guess, somewhere around 2007 or 8, had done what I think may have been a lot of very cheap rust repair. So some years down the line, we found a whole bunch of those problems while trying to honestly just push the fenders for more wheel clearance in the rear. And a couple of years down the line, we just decided, fuck it, let's repaint the whole car and see how that goes. But it looked fairly stock when I got my hands on it, but underneath it was just a New England car, plain and simple. Yeah. In 2016, I had been working with a shop to push the fenders in the rear because I kept running into wheel clearance issues. And a couple of things cracked. We started noticing that some Bondo was showing in places we didn't expect it to. So I had this shop in New Hampshire take it apart, strip it down, find where the actual problems were. And then I hit the internet and sourced some rear quarters from, of all places, a field in Wisconsin, where they shipped them out to us. We had those welded onto the car, straightened out, redid the paint, shaved all of the trim, all the flares. I found some small bumpers off of a guy also in southern New Hampshire, and then went ahead and had the bay shaved by that shop in their style. And really, it was just an absolute can of worms from there. It was just, you found another panel that had a little bit of rust and another panel with a little bit of rust, and it was just welding, sanding, mostly, to be honest, at their end of things. But the end result, quite frankly, was just this stripped down, shaved, exactly what I had always wanted. Simple, old school European sedan. At the end of the day, it was worth it. I mean, it's been back to a paint shop a few times since to correct a few things. But it started off as, a little bit of a rusty heap with a sheen on it, and now it's a less rusty heap with a sheen on it. The story with the VR was that in 2013, while I was on my way to New England Dust Off, I was pulling through Alston at the corner of Harvard and Comm Ave to meet up with some friends to drive to New England Dust Off. And I was in second gear, rolling to a stop, foot on the brake, and it just went bang. And at that moment, I didn't quite grasp what had happened yet. So I put my foot on the clutch, I took it out of gear, it kept just absolutely making that horrific blown up gear noise. And so I stuck it in a parking spot, hopped in a friend's car, went to that show, and bumped into some guys there and said, hey, you've offered to help me put a VR in this car before. Let's make that happen because I'm pretty sure my diff gears are sitting on ComAv right now. So later that day, I called up a tow truck. I had it sent to their spot. And sure enough, a handful of months later, after finding all of the parts that we thought we already had on hand, the engine that is now in this car finally went into it. So a couple of years ago, I want to say in late 2020, when we were all just hanging out at home drinking beer on our own porches, I decided that I was sick of watching this car burn as much oil as it did. So I used the need for valve seals as an excuse to get my hands on some 262 cams from a guy down in Jersey that I want to say is pals with Ted Dorsett. But so I grabbed the cams, I grabbed all of the necessary bits to do a complete head rebuild. I pulled the car into my garage in Somerville and then just yanked the whole engine apart. I did timing chains, I did cams, I did that Mark IV head gasket swap that supposedly gives you a little more compression, but like frankly, who cares? I swapped in a Tektronix chip for the cam and put it all back together, and I'm fairly certain that probably gets me near like 200 horsepower now, but at the end of the day, who cares? It's just a big grumbly lump in a small car. I think at the end of the day, I like old European cars because they have a certain character that is so different to the stuff that I grew up around when I was, knee-high in New England in the late 80s. In that, like, everything that we had around was old Mercurys and old Fords and like old Chevys and whatnot. Like, don't get me wrong, I love an S10 as much as the next guy, but like European cars, or like Volkswagens in particular, especially of like the 80s and 90s, are just stylistic rectangles. And like from like an artistic standpoint, it's fucking cool what they've managed to do with that stuff. I mean, there's that famous quote from Giugiaro, however you pronounce his name, where he describes curved lines as being bullshit. And it's neat because like you have this whole era that's very geometric, but also very accessible. And it was, to me, an angle of automotive enthusiasm that I could get into on the cheap. And I could have fun with my friends on the cheap. And like we could, go to a place, hang out, park our stuff up, shine it up a little bit, drink some beers, hang out. And it was for everyone. And that's what I thought was fun about it. I love the VR, I really do. I think it is ubiquitous, and this chassis is a swap for a reason, just because it's a little bit more power. It's enough to get you into trouble if you really want to, but at the end of the day, it's something that's not hard to maintain. It's objectively easy to work on. It's just generally a good time. I mean, like, I'm frankly fucking obsessed with those stupid 6-cylinder engines. This year, I got my hands on a 6-speed O2M transmission. And this winter, my big project was working with a few different friends to help shoehorn it into this tiny engine bay. And essentially what I've done is swap in a motorsport iteration of that setup that would be compatible with Mark IV GLI. So I put in the O2M, I put in more or less OE clutch assembly. I got my hands on a C shifter. I would strongly recommend those. If you've ever looked at one and said, hey, is that worth it? It fucking is. And it is an absolute treat. I mean, these cars don't need a 6-speed, but I mean, if you have the opportunity to get your hands in one, I would strongly recommend doing so. So for this, every couple of years, I keep telling myself, the car's done, I'm not gonna fuck with it anymore. And I always know that's a lie. I mean, I did spaced out, I did the exterior, I did the engine, I did the interior. I've never touched the trunk because the trunk is for tools. But really, I just want to drive the thing. I've taken it up and down the entire East Coast. It's been from Maine to Florida and back. It's been in the mountains. I want to put more miles on it. I keep saying that I'm going to do a lap of the country in this thing, and I know I would go deaf doing so. But in the same capacity, it's like, it's at a stage where I'm finally pumped about actually sitting down and just rowing some gears, doing some miles, and I'm just going to see what goes wrong next. I'd like to really, I want to thank my buds, Dave and Pete at Victory Auto Designs. They helped me with this transmission project this year. Joe Booth helped me make some trim parts for the interior. He did a great job. Nick Kramerchek, is that his last name? How do I say that? Kramarchek. Yeah, so he made me a beautiful shift knob to go on top of that shift tower there. And over the years, there have just been so many people who have helped with little things. I want to say James at Wheel Lab helped me get my hands on this wheel set, which I absolutely adore. This wheel set is a 16 by 8 and 9 staggered set of CCW Classic 5s. I went with a full polish because you basically have to with those. And the offsets are numbers that I've completely forgotten by now. But it's just a little bit of just like a light bit of that stretch that, you know, you kind of have to do if you want to go wide on these cars. But it's simple, it's straightforward. It's shiny stuff with 5 spokes. This is America, baby. For me, with this car, it's that you don't find a Jetta Coupe every day. And they're relatable enough that, like, I live in the city, I live in the Boston area, and people, when I park it up in the summertime, will come up to me and they'll say, my dad taught me to drive manual in one of these, or like, I remember my uncle had one, or like, I drove one in high school, or guys who are a little older than me will tell me about the one that they had that they were super into back around like the year 2000. So like, it gets people talking in a way where you can't be in a bad mood if you want to drive something like this around people. And to me, that's just such a unique experience that it's not even necessarily just a part of it. It's the part of it that makes it a whole thing. And beyond that, I mean, who doesn't like shiny red wheels on a shiny car with, you know, fucking who knows? You know what I'm trying to say. Look at that shit. Come on. What even is the future? Am I right?
Do you think birds are real?
Of course they're real, Josh. What are you talking about? I mean, they're as real as you can be for data collection devices. No, not necessarily. I still don't know what I'm doing here.